Wu Weiwei looked at the tall man in front of her calmly, her eyelashes covering her eyes. She always had a faint smile. The man spoke in a low and hoarse voice. "You broke into my office like this and said you had something very important to ask me. Do we know each other?" Wu Weiwei's plump lips parted slightly. "It doesn't matter, we will get to know each other right away, Mr. Yi." The man looked at the thin girl in front of him, wearing a washed white floral dress, with black hair reaching her waist, and her big round eyes with an indescribable feeling, and for some reason there was a hint of slyness in her innocence. At a glance, you can tell that she is a little girl who has not yet grown up. Ye Jiliang smiled contemptuously and lightly opened her thin lips. "I'm not interested in things that come to my door automatically." Halfway through his words, Wu Weiwei interrupted him, covering her mouth and laughing softly. "Mr. Yi, I think you misunderstood. I'm not here to talk to you about men and women. There are some things I want to show you. After you read it, we'll talk about it." Ye Jiliang looked at the yellowed and old materials in her hand. Her white jade-like fingers opened the materials and pushed them in front of him. Then she smiled sweetly and motioned for him to open and read. Ye Jiliang rubbed the center of his brows, feeling a little impatient. He flipped through the information in front of him. When he saw his mother's name, he was a little surprised. Then he continued to flip through it, frowning. Once these materials that could be used as evidence were made public, Ye Jiliang Wu Liang's mother will be cast aside by the family, and what's more, it's not impossible that Ye's stock price will plummet. Ye Jiliang frowned and looked up at the girl who was always smiling in front of him. Their eyes met. She had no intention of flinching, and was even full of provocation. Ye Jiliang has never seen such a girl in so many years. She has thrown herself into his arms, and there are countless people trying to get close to him. It seems that the person in front of her is really not here to throw herself into her arms. Ye Jiliang raised his eyebrows and looked at her and said, "I bought all these materials, you set a price." Wu Weiwei burst out laughing. "Mr. Yi, if I was just here for money, I wouldn't have to spend so much time to do this. The information will be mailed to you. Am I still afraid that you won't pay?" Ye Jiliang's deep eyes darkened, and he said impatiently, "So are you threatening me?" Wu Weiwei looked up at him and said very seriously, "Mr. Yi, I need you to get engaged to me, and there must be a grand engagement banquet. If necessary, I want to use your last name. You don't have to worry about what I want to do. I only promise not to break the law, and then when my affairs are understood, you can cancel the engagement directly, and then I will disappear in front of you." Wu Weiwei paused, supporting her chin with her playful fingers, looking at Ye Jiliang and said unceremoniously, "Of course, I won't let you help me in vain. Every time you help me, I will give you a piece of evidence in return. You should know better than me what this evidence means." Ye Jiliang looked at her for a long time, tapping the luxurious desk with his slender fingers, making a thumping sound. Wu Weiwei added, "I am pressed for time. I have no time and no patience to wait. I hope you can decide now." Ye Jiliang raised her lips and smiled. "You want the identity of Ye's fiancé, do you know what this identity means?" Wu Weiwei smiled calmly. "I just know what this identity means, so I came to discuss it with you. I need this identity to endorse me. We have also agreed that when the matter is over, you will still be you and I will still be me. How about it?" Ye Jiliang watched her turn around and go out. She suddenly paused and smiled slightly. "Mr. Yi, I hope you will do what you say. As the saying goes, those who are barefoot are not afraid of those who wear shoes. I believe you will not make any stupid mistakes. It's a mistake, and I won't cause you any trouble because of this identity. We have a happy cooperation." Ye Jiliang looked at the slowly closing door, leaned back on the boss's chair, and murmured to himself, "It's interesting." Wu Weiwei took the elevator downstairs, turning a blind eye to the whispers of the people next to her and some small but audible jeers. She got off the elevator and walked directly to the bus stop. She had already checked the route, got on the bus, and headed to a villa area. Wu Weiwei looked at the luxurious villa in front of her with a sneer on her lips. "My father, who had been away for many years, lived in this luxurious house. While he was enjoying the glory and wealth, my mother died of illness and scenes that had happened flashed through her mind." Wu Weiwei looked at the photo of her mother's frown in the wallet, gently touched the photo, carefully put it away, and walked in. When the doorbell rang, the nanny opened the door and looked at the young lady standing at the door, a little puzzled. Wu Weiwei smiled politely and said, "Hello, I'm looking for Wu Qiming." The nanny looked at her in plain clothes and saw that she was so young and came directly to see her husband. The nanny was even more puzzled. Wu Weiwei had lived with her mother for so many years, and she could see the contempt in her nanny's eyes at a glance. Wu Weiwei raised her lips slightly and said, "He is my father. I haven't seen him for many years. I want to come and see him." The nanny looked at her in surprise, a little doubtful. Without knowing whether it was true or not, the nanny had no choice but to go in and report it. After a while, a middle-aged man wearing a well-tailored suit came out. Time has left many marks on his face, but it cannot conceal the beauty of his youth. The father and daughter looked at each other. Wu Qiming looked at Wu Weiwei in front of him in surprise. He was so shocked that he forgot to close his mouth. Wu Weiwei's eyes were shining with tears, and she held back the tears and shouted softly, "Dad." When Wu Qiming heard this, he looked at his daughter who was already so old and cried with excitement. He stretched out his trembling hand to touch her head and shouted, "Weiwei." Wu Weiwei covered her mouth and cried, with tears in her eyes, "Dad, Mom is gone, it's so sudden." Wu Qiming trembled all over and could hardly stand still. He held Wu Weiwei's shoulders and said with some pain, "Why didn't I know when it happened?" Wu Weiwei shook her head and cried, "Mom, she didn't let me tell you. She said it must have been difficult for you outside these years, so don't disturb your life." Wu Qiming recalled his ex-wife's gentle demeanor, how he had always been submissive to her no matter what, and how she had silently paid for him all those years. Wu Qiming grabbed the clothes on his chest. He couldn't pretend to be sad. Wu Weiwei lowered her eyes and raised a sneer on her covered lips. "It turns out that you will be sad too, Wu Qiming." Wu Qiming suddenly reacted, quickly took Wu Weiwei into the house, and then personally brought her home shoes to put on. The nannies were busy in and out preparing drinks and food. Wu Qiming took Wu Weiwei to sit on the leather sofa in the living room. He looked at her sadly and said, "Weiwei, how did you find this place?" Wu Weiwei stopped her sobs, lowered her head shyly and said, "I was admitted to the university here, my mother left, and I am penniless. I don't want to disturb my father. I want to borrow some tuition fees, and I will work to earn money. Give it back to Daddy." Wu Qiming's eyes widened angrily, and he said with some annoyance, "Nonsense, asking your father to get money to study, is that a loan? Dad should give it to you." Wu Weiwei lowered her head and said nothing, looking obedient and sensible. Wu Qiming looked at the eldest daughter in front of him and sighed in his heart. After all, this child followed her mother, she was very weak. Wu Qiming remembered that he was still a father, and he had indeed owed her all these years. Now that his ex-wife had passed away, he thought that her life must be difficult now, otherwise she would not have come so far to seek help from him. Wu Weiwei gave a wry smile and looked a little at a loss. She lowered her head and said, "I know, Dad still cares about us, but you also have your own difficulties. I know that, and I don't want to embarrass Dad." Wu Qiming puffed up his chest and said, "What's the problem? I'm your dad. I should be responsible for your affairs. You don't have to worry about it. Just wait for school to start. Dad will handle other things." Wu Weiwei finally smiled. The tears on her face were not dry yet. She smiled sweetly, "Really? Dad?" Wu Qiming was called by his father, and his whole body fell into the memories of the past. In the past, when she was still a baby, he held her in his arms. She was so soft and cute. Wu Qiming made a decision in his heart to let her stay and go to school with peace of mind. Wu Qiming said, "You can live here with peace of mind, don't think about anything, just wait for school to start." Suddenly there was a bang, and the door was pushed open with force. Wu Qiming looked at Zhou Yulan walking over arrogantly, and his face turned pale with fear. Wu Weiwei stood up in a panic, then stood on the edge, not knowing where to put her hands. "I will never allow that bitch's daughter to live here. Wu Qiming, how did you promise my parents when you married me?" a woman yelled. "Don't settle the old scores anymore. I've been a coward in your family all these years, and I've never felt sorry for you. Don't point fingers at me anymore. What happened to my own daughter when I took her to my own home?" The man a rich voice sounded. "Well, Wu Qiming, you fell out against me when my parents passed away. You relied on my parents to make your fortune back then, but now they are still dead, and you bully me." A woman's high-pitched voice passed through this independent villa. Wu Weiwei was in the living room and heard the sound of their argument. The sound of the slut's daughter penetrated her ears, and she inadvertently revealed a sneer on her lips. The injustice her mother has suffered over the years, and the pain of dying due to illness, should be repaid, she thought to herself. A beautiful figure came over. She took off her glasses angrily, looked at Wu Weiwei beside her, and rushed up to her in anger and slapped her. Wu Weiwei was beaten until stars appeared in her eyes. She suppressed the coldness in her eyes, forced tears, and looked at the person who beat her in confusion. Wu Weiwei was so aggrieved that she cried, "Why did you hit me?" Wu Mengmeng pointed at her with her hands on her hips and scolded her like a shrew, "Are you so shameless? You are as shameless as your mother. Your mother seduced my father, and you still want to live in my house. You are all a bunch of shameless people. You bitch." Wu Weiwei cried faintly. She wiped the tears from her eyes and explained, "That's not the case. I don't want to come back. It's Dad." Wu Mengmeng screamed in anger, "Shut up, you are not allowed to call me daddy. He is my daddy, not the daddy of you bitch." The scream caused Wu Qiming to turn around. He looked at Wu Weiwei whose face was beaten and swollen, and then at the arrogant Wu Mengmeng. He clenched his fist. Wu Qiming yelled, "Shut up. Who taught you these dirty words?" Wu Mengmeng cried out as soon as her mouth collapsed, "Dad, how could you be cruel to me? You have never been cruel to me. You love me so much. You have changed. Dad, how can you be like this?" Zhou Yulan's roar then sounded, "Wu Qiming, don't go too far. You actually dare to yell at Mengmeng. She is your daughter. Are you too old and unconscious? You want to take her back, you just get out of this house with her. This villa was left to me by my parents." Wu Qiming seemed to have been poked in a painful spot, and he slapped him with his backhand. Zhou Yulan was knocked to the ground and looked at him in disbelief. Wu Qiming looked at his hand and didn't recover for a long time. He didn't believe that he had taken action. Zhou Yulan cried bitterly, covered his face, stood up, and said with a ferocious expression, "Okay, Wu Qiming, you have grown up. I, Zhou Yulan, was blind and fell in love with you back then. Just wait for me. I will take all the shares in the company. Take it back and I will make you clean up and leave the house." Wu Weiwei lay there sideways, listening to their argument quietly, and then smiled mockingly without any trace. "This must be your retribution." Only then did Wu Qiming react. He went up to hug Zhou Yulan and coaxed him, "Honey, I was wrong. I was obsessed. Don't be angry. It's all my fault. I may have drunk too much today. Don't be angry." Zhou Yulan pushed him away and yelled, "You are wrong. Where are you wrong? What, you know you are afraid, right? Wu Qiming, I can see you clearly now. You were just after my family's money. You just married me." Wu Mengmeng ran over and hugged Zhou Yulan and cried loudly. Both mother and daughter accused Wu Qiming of being ruthless. Wu Qiming thought of Zhou Yulan and knew that she had been pampered since she was a child. Everything had to go her way. If she didn't go her way, she might really take back those shares. After thinking about it, Wu Qiming immediately changed his attitude. He looked at Zhou Yulan, and then slowly knelt down. "Wife, I was really wrong. I didn't take her back, but she is also my daughter. This is an unchangeable fact. If I don't care about her, ask, if the media finds out, it will also affect our stock price." Zhou Yulan looked down at Wu Qiming, thinking that what he said was true, and said impatiently, "Then you can arrange a place for her casually. Our family's money is not blown by the strong wind. She lives well in the country. I've already given her a monthly living allowance, but I've already turned a blind eye, and it's too much for you to say you want to take her back now." Wu Qiming lowered his head and said, "Isn't it true that she got admitted to college? She happens to be in this city. If I let it go, if word spreads, what will happen to me? I am also thinking about us." Zhou Yulan is used to being arrogant and domineering. She doesn't like others disobeying her. She glared at Wu Qiming on the ground and said, "I don't care about that. You can figure it out yourself. Anyway, you have to remember two things. First, she is not allowed to be disclosed to the public. Your daughter. Secondly, you are not allowed to take her back." Wu Qiming lowered his head in a cowardly manner, and his knees were a little numb. He had been working low and low for these years, without even giving up a man's dignity. Wasn't it just so that one day he could inherit this company? What does this mean now? After so many years of enduring it, let's endure it some more. Zhou Yulan looked at Wu Weiwei mockingly, and then said to Wu Qiming, "Get her away quickly, don't dirty our house, and one more thing, don't think about giving her good food and clothes, you have to know your money, all belong to our Zhou family." Wu Qiming got up with some difficulty, and Zhou Yulan twisted around and went upstairs. She was very confident. Wu Qiming had never been disobedient in front of her in these years. Wu Qiming slowly walked up to Wu Weiwei. Wu Weiwei forced a smile, the wound on her face was pulled, and she frowned slightly. Wu Qiming looked at her tearful eyes and thought of his ex-wife. In fact, he felt somewhat guilty, but he soon suppressed his unbearable feeling. Wu Qiming knew that Zhou Yulan must be listening upstairs, so he said coldly and ruthlessly, Weiwei, Dad is incompetent, you should figure out the university matters yourself. Wu Weiwei forced a smile on her face and held back her tears to comfort him. Dad, it's okay, I can work part-time. Don't make yourself embarrassed anymore. You and Aunt Yulan were living a good life, but my appearance disturbed you. I'll leave now. Wu Weiwei climbed up from the sofa with difficulty. She looked as thin as if she would fall if the wind blew. She held back tears and struggled to carry her backpack. Wu Qiming even hated himself a little. How could a father be so cruel? She was also his biological daughter. All those years of self-blame for his ex-wife and hatred for Zhou Yulan filled his chest. When Wu Weiwei walked to the door, she looked at Wu Qiming with some reluctance and said, Dad, my mother and I know that your life has not been easy these years. My mother has never blamed you. She has always understood you. Dad, let's go, you take good care of yourself in the future, and I will take care of myself too, you really don't have to worry about me. Wu Mingmeng was furious and said angrily, if you keep pretending to be pitiful, you would have left long ago. Why are you still waiting for my father to change his mind and keep you? Wu Weiwei shook her head and said humbly, No, I'm leaving now, but I don't know the way. Can I ask for the way out? Wu Qiming thought for a while and asked for directions. There was nothing he couldn't say, so he replied, Where are you going? Wu Weiwei choked up and said, My mother said before that I was engaged to the Ye family. I know you didn't mean not to take me in, but I'm really penniless. I can only go to the Ye family. Zhou Yulan looked at everything downstairs and thought about what kind of marriage her poor mother could arrange for her. She was probably a poor boy, and he was just an ordinary office worker. Wu Qiming asked, Which Ye family? Do you know the approximate location? Wu Weiwei thought for a while and said a little confused, It seems to be some kind of Ye family, which is also near where Dad lives. I don't know exactly where it is. Wu Qiming took a breath, thinking he heard wrong, and then asked, You said it was the Ye group, is it the Ye group? Weiwei, you can't talk nonsense, the Ye group is a multinational group, there is only one Ye family living nearby, and they have an independent garden. Zhou Yulan was also shocked. How many connections did they rely on to buy the villa here in order to get closer to the Ye family? She just said that she was engaged to the Ye family? Zhou Yulan thought to himself that she must have made it up, and he made up his mind to keep her, and then see her lies exposed, so that Wu Qiming would not want to see her anymore, killing two birds with one stone. Zhou Yulan looked at Wu Weiwei. The more he looked at her, the more he felt that she looked like her mother. Her nails dug into her flesh. Oh, just wait for your ugly appearance when your lies are discovered. Wu Weiwei was getting ready to go out, but Wu Qiming was still in shock. Zhou Yulan shouted, Stop! Wu Weiwei turned back and looked at them with a confused expression, and Wu Qiming also looked back at Zhou Yulan. Zhou Yulan ordered, Come here. Wu Weiwei raised her head and glanced at Wu Qiming, standing there at a loss and not daring to move. Wu Qiming became a little irritable and said, I already told her to send her away, what else are you going to do? Zhou Yulan sneered and said, She said she was engaged to Ye's eldest son, and you just let her go. How will we explain to Ye in the future? I think it's better to do this. You will have a banquet in 2 days, and I will send you there in person during the inauguration ceremony of my fiancé, young Master Ye. Wu Qiming thought that his daughter had made a mistake, and he didn't want her to go to such a big occasion and embarrass herself, which would make him lose face, so he disagreed. Zhou Yulan glared at Wu Qiming and said, She is your biological daughter. If she is really engaged to the Ye family, wouldn't it be good for you? If it is true, we have offended the Ye family inexplicably. Wu Qiming opened his mouth, not knowing what to say. He could only look back at his eldest daughter and said, Weiwei, are you mistaken? Look at the address your mother left for you. It's not here. Wu Weiwei quickly took out a piece of paper from the suitcase, then took a serious look at it, handed it to Wu Qiming and said, Dad, look, it says Ye's name on it, and the address is right here. Wu Qiming looked at the beautiful handwriting on it and confirmed that it was his ex-wife's handwriting. However, he was a little surprised. When did his ex-wife make the engagement for their eldest daughter? How could he not know? Zhou Yulan rolled his eyes, thinking that she was pretty good at making it up, so fine, I'll act out the whole scene with you, and then I'll take care of you. Zhou Yulan ordered the nanny to clean up the room for Wu Weiwei to live in. Wu Mingming's scream sounded, and Zhou Yulan went to comfort her again. After a busy night, Wu Weiwei was finally able to enter the room assigned to her. Wu Weiwei entered the room, closed the door, and looked at the layout of the room with a sneer. Even if it was just a guest room, it was so magnificent. They must have lived a happy life in these years. Wu Weiwei stroked the silk bedspread on the bed, then tightened a corner, and raised the corners of her lips slightly. Mom, I will take back everything that should belong to you. Wu Weiwei fell asleep on the bed. After Zhou Yulin returned to the room, he dragged Wu Mengmeng and persuaded, just wait for 2 days. Then I will bring her to the Ye family banquet and humiliate her in front of everyone. She even said shamelessly she is engaged to Mrs. Ye, and when the time comes to expose her lies and embarrass her, your father will definitely be fed up with her. You know that your father loves to save face. Wu Mengmeng didn't have any brains. When her mother said this, she felt it made sense. She felt excited just thinking about it. She held Zhou Yulin's hand and said, Mom, that's great. I thought you really wanted to take her in. Zhou Yulin touched her head and said, How can we take her in? Come on, my good daughter, don't be angry, wash up quickly, put on a facial mask and go to bed. Wu Mengmeng nodded and said, I know, Mom, you should go and rest too. The 2 days that Wu Weiwei stayed at home were calm, and Zhou Yulin didn't raise eyebrows. But Wu Weiwei knew that this was just the calm before the storm, but she didn't care at all. She also had a surprise for mother and daughter. On the day of the banquet, Zhou Yulin wore a custom-made silk cheongsam to bring out her femininity, while Wu Mengmeng wore a limited edition dress from a big brand. Zhou Yulin looked at Wu Weiwei wearing a floral dress that was washed white, and pretended to be surprised. Weiwei, the place we are going to today is a place where celebrities and nobles gather. You can't dress so shabby, Mengmeng over there are many dresses. You guys have similar body shapes, just pick one and wear it. Wu Weiwei lowered her head shyly, holding Baiyu's hand in front of her, looking obedient. Wu Mengmeng said arrogantly, You are so petty and can't stand on the stage. I don't lack 1 or 2 pieces of clothing. I told you to pick them out, so go ahead. Wu Weiwei thanked her in a small voice and had no choice but to follow them in to pick out a dress. Zhou Yulin and Wu Mengmeng were waiting to see her joke, waiting for her to choose the most inappropriate dress to wear. Wu Weiwei took out a lake blue dress and looked at it, then turned around and said timidly, Let's take this one. I'll go change first. Thank you Aunt Yulin and Mengmeng. When Wu Weiwei entered the changing room, Zhou Yulin and Wu Mengmeng burst out laughing. Wu Mengmeng said with a smile, This country bumpkin, as expected, chose the most old-fashioned gift. If I remember correctly, this gift is for me. It was custom-made for my 18th-year-old coming-of-age ceremony. How many years have passed, but she can actually pick it out. I have all this year's new styles here. Zhou Yulin covered his mouth and said with a sneer, She has never seen the world, so don't worry about it. As long as she doesn't wear rags, let her be. When Wu Weiwei got dressed and walked out, Zhou Yulin and her daughter looked up and their noses almost became angry. Wu Weiwei wore her braids casually, exposing her slender neck. She looked very shy and timid. The lake blue dress gave her a retro feel. She walked past the floor-to-ceiling window and slowly stopped in front of Zhou Yulin and her daughter. Wu Mengmeng looked at her jealously and wanted to take off her skirt. Zhou Yulin whispered in her ear, A small impatience will ruin a big plan. Wu Mengmeng snorted, raised her head and walked out of the room proudly. Zhou Yulin looked at Wu Weiwei with a fake smile, and then walked out one after another. Wu Qiming drove himself and his family went to Ye's banquet. During the banquet, Wu Qiming chatted with some entrepreneurs, while Zhou Yulin took Wu Weiwei and Wu Mengmeng to the female guest area. Zhou Yulin chatted and laughed with the famous ladies familiarly, and the group of people looked back at Wu Weiwei from time to time. Zhou Yulin raised his hand elegantly and shouted softly, Weiwei, come here. Wu Weiwei walked over with a smile, and those famous ladies looked at Wu Weiwei with disdain. One of the ladies looked at Wu Weiwei coldly and said sarcastically, Hey, whose daughter is this? Did she go to the wrong place? I said Mrs. Zhou, you came to attend the Ye family's banquet, and you brought relatives from your hometown, did you bring it with you? Zhou Yulin pretended to be aggrieved and said, Oh, Mrs. Li, don't say that. Although she is a distant relative, it is her first time in the city. I will bring her to see the world. The noble lady covered her mouth and laughed, speaking of which, not everyone can come to Ye's banquet. She entered the venue because of you, so she should stay well and don't move around casually. I'll give it to you when the time comes. Shame on you. Zhou Yulin pretended to defend Wu Weiwei and said, Mrs. Li, don't say that. I have taken advantage of my Weiwei. You may not know it. Weiwei told us that she was engaged to the eldest son of the Ye family, so I specially bring her here and let them meet too. The group of people bent over with laughter, and even the drinks they were holding squirted out with laughter, and the water stains splashed onto Weiwei's face. A slightly younger woman, well-dressed, came over and said to Weiwei, "I think you are out of your mind and crazy. You are engaged to Ye's eldest son. Isn't this ridiculous? I think you need to calm down." After saying that, she poured all the wine in the glass on Weiwei's head. More and more people were watching, and they laughed at each other. They whispered, "This girl looks quite normal. I didn't expect that there is something wrong with her brain. She actually said that she was engaged to the eldest son of Ye. How could the eldest son of Ye be engaged to a wild girl who didn't know where she came from? This is so funny. Come on." Zhou Yulan pretended to go over and wipe Weiwei, and then said aggrievedly, "Weiwei, I also do it for you, but you don't listen and have to come here. Look, you are better now. How embarrassing." Wu Qiming also heard the movement in the crowd, and then walked over and felt extremely embarrassed. He was a little irritated. This daughter was really embarrassing to him. He originally thought she was pitiful and wanted to take her in. But now it seems that this daughter is really embarrassing to him. My daughter is also a troublemaker. An entrepreneur looked at Wu Qiming maliciously and said, "Is she a poor relative of yours? How could she say such a thing?" Wu Qiming felt so embarrassed that he motioned to Zhou Yulan to take Wu Weiwei out. Zhou Yulan also saw Wu Qiming's boredom, and then said to Wu Weiwei, "Weiwei, let's go, so many people are watching, how embarrassing it is." Wu Weiwei looked at them pretending to be aggrieved and scared, and then her eyes turned red from crying. Her eyelashes covered the coldness in her eyes. "Oh, these people." Ye Jiliang walked through the crowd and saw Wu Weiwei standing awkwardly in the crowd at a glance. Everyone looked up to Ye, the new CEO, with admiration in their eyes, and gathered around to please him. The bodyguards around Ye Jiliang blocked their approach and protected him through the crowd. The pretentious looks of those famous ladies were completely ignored by Ye Jiliang. Mrs. Li relied on her husband's company to cooperate with Mr. Yi, and thought that she could also strike up a conversation with Mr. Yi. She lowered her eyebrows and said, "Mr. Yi, I am Li Mu's wife. Our family also cooperates a lot with your family. It's New Year's Eve." Ye Jiliang glanced at her, and then walked to Wu Weiwei amidst everyone's surprised eyes. Almost everyone looked at this scene in disbelief. Ye Jiliang, the eldest son of the Yi family, walked over in person and wiped off the stains on her face. Zhou Yulan's jaw dropped and he couldn't say a word for a long time. Ye Jiliang stared at Wu Weiwei with extremely gentle eyes, and coaxed softly, "Why didn't you tell me that you were coming, so that I could send someone to pick you up?" Wu Weiwei cried faintly, "Brother Jiliang, I may have done something wrong. They all scolded me and poured wine on me. I'm so scared." The way she bit her lip and cried in grievance was really heartbreaking. Ye Jiliang raised his eyebrows and looked at the crowd. They shrank their necks in fear, and then some took a step back in embarrassment. Wu Weiwei leaned gently on Ye Jiliang's arm, trembling a little while crying. Ye Jiliang gently stroked her head and said, "Don't be afraid, I'm here." Zhou Yulan didn't know what was going on, so he said a little awkwardly, "Yi, young master Yi," she said, "she is engaged to you. I know you must be well-intentioned and can't bear to expose her. I will take her away now." Ye Jiliang looked at Zhou Yulan funny, then held Wu Weiwei's hand and said, "Today's inauguration ceremony has been prepared a little hastily. I haven't announced to you yet that she, Wu Weiwei, will be engaged to me in the near future. I will notify you of the engagement banquet at that time." Wu Weiwei watched Zhou Yulan accidentally bite her tongue in shock, and the group gasped. Wu Qiming opened his mouth and looked at them, unable to say a word. Someone bold enough to say sour words, "Master Yi, why don't we know about your engagement? Besides, you should be engaged to the daughter of a big family. How come? I don't know where this wild girl came from. Have you recognized the wrong person?" The warmth in Ye Jiliang's eyes subsided. He glanced at the man and said indifferently, "When will my Yi family's affairs need to be known to others? Who are you? You will go to Ye's finance to settle the matter later. You don't need to appear in front of me in the future, understand?" Those people were still in shock and had not recovered before Ye Jiliang took Wu Weiwei and prepared to leave. Wu Weiwei's eyes were red from crying, and she looked at Ye Jiliang like a frightened rabbit and said, "Brother Jiliang, I was humiliated by them here today. It's nothing to me personally, but I did it for Ye's sake, and more importantly, it's for your sake. I told them that I have an engagement with you, but they still treat me like this. It's clear that they don't take Mr. Yi seriously." Ye Jiliang was also a little surprised. If it were another girl, shouldn't she pay attention to her image at this time and follow him quickly? Ye Jiliang looked at her tenderly, but the smile did not reach the corner of his eyes and said, "Then what do you think we should do with them?" The tears on Wu Weiwei's face had not yet dried. She looked at Ye Jiliang ignorantly and said, "She just poured wine on my head in front of everyone. So many people saw it. When the time comes, spread the word. During your inauguration ceremony, your fiancé was doused with wine, and we left like this. Wouldn't that mean we were disregarding Mr. Ye's face?" Ye Jiliang laughed in her heart. This woman is really interesting. Ye Jiliang rarely found it amusing, so he answered her words, then let her bow and apologize. Wu Weiwei shook her head and said seriously, "Just bowing and apologizing can't save this face. Let her kneel down and admit her mistake in front of everyone, and let those long-tongued women also know the majesty of Ye's family. No provocation allowed." Ye Jiliang looked at the weak girl in front of him in disbelief. How could she say such a serious thing? If it were any other woman, she would have to pretend to be gentle and virtuous. Wu Weiwei snuggled on Ye Jiliang's arm. A small sob came from her, as if she had been greatly wronged. Ye Jiliang raised his eyebrows and glanced at her. He followed her performance and said coldly, "You are right, I was confused." Wu Weiwei pointed at the woman pouring the wine and said, "Then kneel down to show your sincerity." The arrogant woman just now looked at Ye Jiliang tremblingly. Her family members also came over, accusing her of what she shouldn't have done, and then asked her to kneel down and apologize. Of course she knew that there was nothing she could not give up in the face of family interests. Let alone Mr. Yi, a person who can make your company collapse overnight with just one sentence. The woman knelt down in humiliation, holding back tears and apologizing. "I was offended just now. I sincerely admit my mistake. I hope you can forgive me." Wu Weiwei said softly, "You don't need to apologize to me, the one you have to apologize to is Mr. Yi." When Wu Weiwei lowered her head, there was a slight smile on her lips. People are always like this. They lower their heads in front of money and power. As long as you stand at the top, no matter what you have done wrong, others will flatter you. She wants to take over. She doesn't need to do anything after she comes down, someone will jump out and speak for her. You see, she pretends to be innocent just right, huh? After Ye Jiliang left with Wu Weiwei, everyone pointed at the people kneeling on the ground and scolded, humiliated, and laughed at each other. Wu Weiwei put away her tears and was in a good mood. She held Ye Jiliang's hand and accepted the admiration of everyone and left the venue, leaving behind those cluttered sounds. When they arrived at the lounge, Ye Jiliang leaned casually on the sofa, raised her eyebrows and looked at Wu Weiwei who was standing there touching up her makeup and said, "Are you very proud?" Wu Weiwei stopped her movements, looked at Ye Jiliang with a smile and said, "Anyway, your performance today was just right, and I will send one of the evidences to you later." Ye Jiliang rubbed his eyebrows tiredly, then raised his eyes to look at her. "What on earth are you going to do with your identity as my fiancé?" Wu Weiwei leaned against the dressing table, folded her hands, and smiled. "I think I made it clear to you before. You don't have to worry about what I want to do. When the matter is over, we will have nothing to do with it." Wu Weiwei winked playfully and said, "Mr. Yi, don't try to inquire about my affairs. I never follow the rules when doing things. If the time comes, everyone will be unhappy, and you will lose more than you gain, don't you think?" Ye Jiliang frowned and looked at her, a little angry. When had he ever been threatened by a little girl, but still so blatantly? After Wu Weiwei left, Ye Jiliang leaned on the sofa with some boredom and thought, who is this woman, where does she come from, and how can she have such courage and intelligence? Wu Weiwei slowly walked up to Wu Qiming and stood obediently by the side without saying anything. Zhou Yulin was surrounded by a group of women and walked up to Wu Weiwei to say hello. Zhou Yulin had a stiff smile on his face, and said reluctantly, "Weiwei, these ladies are my friends, and they want to get to know you." Wu Weiwei replied shyly, "Hello, aunties." Those women who could change their expressions faster than turning the pages of a book began to flatter me and said, "Miss Wu, I hope you won't forgive me for the offense I caused before. It's also our fault for being ignorant. Don't take it to heart." Wu Weiwei nodded obediently and said, "No, it was all a misunderstanding before." Wu Qiming looked at his daughter in front of him, who looked so soft and frail, but still couldn't figure out when the engagement between her and the eldest son of the Yi family was really made. Under the admiration of everyone, Wu Qiming left with his family, and Wu Weiwei followed obediently behind. Zhou Yulin's face was almost crumpled with anger. Why should she be the one engaged to the Yi family? It should be her daughter. Why should it be her? On the way home, Wu Mengmeng was a little angry and said sarcastically, with your status, even if you marry the Yi family, you are still a country bumpkin,